Suddenly, she bursted into laughter. I know you can make clay pots for cooking, but I am looking for someone who can continuously afford to buy foodstuff to cook inside those your pots. Will you leave my compound this minute? She shouted angrily. Story. Once upon a time in a faraway village, there lived a beautiful maiden. She was so beautiful that the villagers would often bet on how much it would cost to marry the beautiful Bola. Every young man wanted her for himself, and they were ready to do anything to marry her. Bola, on the other hand, was very aware of the commotion her beauty was causing in the village, and she loved every bit of it. Her auntie, Kudi, had prepared her for this her entire life. She often told Bola, whenever she is braiding her hair, that she will marry a wealthy husband who will bring them a lot of wealth. And Bola took those words to heart every time she heard them. As time went on, she began to believe that was her only purpose in life. Auntie Kudi had no children of her own, and she had to take care of Bola and her siblings after her sister died. She loves Bola more than the other children. Auntie Kudi made it everyone's mission in the house to always make Bola happy. Whenever Bola was sad, they had to sing or dance to make her smile. Whatever they ate was dependent on what Bola was craving, and they referred to her as Queen instead of her name because their auntie insisted it would be a reminder to Bola that she is royalty in the making. To make matters worse, Auntie Kudi would send the other children to some villagers to work, and the money they earned was used to take care of Bola. She would encourage them as she took their money, saying, "Don't worry, when your sister brings a wealthy man home, our lives will change for good." Despite all these treatments, the other siblings did not hate their little sister, even though their auntie clearly favored her. They stayed close to her because they remembered their happy times together as children and still saw her as their sister. When it was finally time for Bola to get married, Auntie Kudi became even more determined to find the right suitor. She was especially harsh when the wrong type of man came to her compound to seek Bola's hand in marriage. "Are you not the potter who has a shop close to the market?" Auntie Kudi asked one suitor who came to marry Bola. The man confidently nodded, happy that Kudi recognized him. Suddenly, she bursted into laughter. "I know you can make clay pots for cooking, but I am looking for someone who can continuously afford to buy foodstuff to cook inside those your pots. Will you leave my compound this minute?" She shouted angrily. Others would come and she would angrily pour a huge bucket of water on them or splash wet charcoal on their clothes, and sometimes when she was feeling very wicked, she would go ahead to cook a meal for the suitor, then add a lot of pepper into the meal. So when the suitor requested for water, she would mock them and tell them that they had the effrontery to ask for water even after eating free food. The villagers had mixed feelings about Kudi's actions. Some would joke severely about her situation. "She thinks she is the only one with a beautiful niece. In fact, we are not even interested anymore." But despite their words, whenever Bola took her usual evening stroll, the young men were captivated by her beauty all over again, easily forgetting her auntie's behavior. She carried herself with a natural grace that made her stand out wherever she went. One day, the time finally came for Auntie Kudi to receive the reward for her long-awaited plans. There was an extremely wealthy merchant called Kunle who came into the village to do business with the king. Kunle was the richest man in the entire region, and to honor him, the king held an exclusive banquet for him, and in the evening, the king took him on a walk to see his kingdom. And walking behind them were some warriors and a musician who sang loud praises of the king and Kunle as they walked. At the same time, Bola and her auntie decided to go on an evening stroll together. From a distance, the praises from the musician reached Kudi's ears, and she could not help but wonder how Kunle looked. Everyone from the region knew about him, but she had never seen him as he was not from her village. "Can you hear what they are saying about that man?" she asked Bola in excitement. "Those are the types of suitors I want from you." "But auntie, a man like that will already have so many wives, and someone like that is not fit for me." She answered her auntie. Kudi smiled at her. "I am happy you know who you are, and I was not insinuating that he was your husband. I was only referring to his riches. Anyways, let us hurry so that we can catch a glimpse of this great man." Eventually, they got close to the king and his guests. So Kudi and her niece greeted politely, and just as they were about to continue walking, Kunle called out to Bola. "Excuse me, young maiden," he said. Kunle and the king exchanged glances to acknowledge her beauty. Then the king said, "Are you looking for a new wife?" Kunle smiled and said, "Since my wife passed away, I have not been interested in any other woman, but I believe this beautiful maiden will be a wonderful fit for my only child, Jide." Auntie Kudi was very excited. If anyone had told her that her niece would be chosen by Kunle to marry his son, she would have never believed it. All her hard work had finally paid off afterwards. Kunle then informed Kudi that he would come back with his son and kingsmen to officially make their intention known. So the agreement was made in the presence of the king, and news quickly spread around the village. Soon, many of the villagers became friendly at Kudi. They wanted to be friends with the in-law of the wealthy Kunle. Kudi, on the other hand, spared no expenses. She sourced for funds from her other nephews who were now married, and when that was not enough, she borrowed from people, promising to pay them back. She knew that once Bola was married into Kunle's family, her financial worries would be over. 2 weeks later, as promised, Kunle came with his kingsmen, but when they all sat down, she noticed that the men he had come with were all the same age as him. So she asked him, "You said you'll be coming with your son, but I have not seen him, or is he on his way?" Kunle smiled and responded, "Apologies, my in-law. You know my son Jide is the heir to all my wealth. He had to attend some urgent business matters in a distant village, but he trusts my decision." Kudi laughed out loud and said, Of course, I understand. After all, he will be here for the wedding. We can do without him today." The dowry payments commenced. Soon after, a date was chosen for the wedding and preparations were in full gear. Kudi put Bola through several expensive beauty treatments, and she spared no expense in the wedding preparations. In the midst of all these preparations, Bola would quietly wonder about her groom and what he looked like. Yes, she was happy she would be married into riches like her auntie desired, but secretly, she also wanted to love and be loved by her future husband. And each passing day leading to the wedding, her anticipation grew. When the day finally came, she got dressed in the most beautiful attire, and she was adorned with the most beautiful royal beads. Many prestigious guests invited by Kunle flocked Kudi's compound, including the king. The visitors brought many gifts, and the villagers watched in admiration each time someone influential arrived. But all that did not concern Bola. She would peek through the window of the room severally. She waited, hoping to see when Kunle and his son would arrive. After what seemed like eternity to Bola, Jide finally arrived with his father and several other kingsmen. The musicians sang praises of him and his father, and they walked into the ceremony. Bola ran to the window to catch a glimpse of him, and when she did, she was pleasantly pleased. Jide was a good-looking man, well-built with a charming smile. But despite his looks, Bola could not help but wonder why he was so plainly dressed for the groom. But she overlooked it and said to herself, I have always heard that wealthy people do not like to be overdressed anyways. The wedding ceremony eventually began and Bola was ushered out to meet her husband, and drums played beautifully, blending with a melodious tune from the African flutes. Bola danced elegantly, swaying her hips to the tune of the music. Afterwards, she picked Jide out of the crowd as tradition demanded, to signify that it was her husband. The whole crowd cheered in excitement, but to Bola and Jide, it was only them that existed as their eyes met. It was clear they were attracted to each other. One would believe they had been in love for many years. The marriage ceremony was over. Jide and his bride made their way home. However, Bola rode in a separate carriage while Jide rode together with Kunle because they had urgent matters to address. When they finally arrived at Kunle's home, she was stunned. His home was magnificent, nothing like she had ever seen before. Jide went to his bride and said, "My wife, welcome home. The maid will usher you to our quarters. Give me an hour to finish my conversation with my father. He will be traveling tomorrow, and this is the only chance I have." As instructed, the maid ushered her into her quarters. But when she entered, she was alarmed. The quarters was very plain. "Are we in the right place?" she asked the maid. "Yes, ma, this is Master Jide's quarters," the maid answered. Bola asked her to leave, but she was in shock. She stepped outside the quarters to ensure she was still in Kule's compound. Jide's quarters and the compound were like two different worlds. "Well, I guess this place was lacking a woman's touch. Now that I am here, I will beautify it to my standard," she said to herself. Bola decided to start opening the gifts she received from her wedding while she waited for Jide. There were lots of gifts and she could not wait to see what each contained. Slowly, she unwrapped them, revealing pots, expensive materials, and lots of other things. But she soon felt sleepy and she laid beside the huge pile of gifts and slept off. "Wake up!" Bola heard someone saying in her sleep. She rubbed her eyes and saw Jide in front of her. She did not realize she had slept off. "Oh, my husband, I was waiting for you, so I decided to open our gift while I waited," she said as she yawned. But Jide was not pleased. "We should have discussed this before you began. Don't you know that we can gift these items to others when we are invited for occasions? That way, we will save money," he said. Bola was confused by his response, but she decided to not ask any more questions. "I am sorry, I was not aware," she answered him. Jide felt he might have been too harsh, so he apologized. Then he sat next to her and said, "You made such a beautiful bride. You are a beautiful woman," he complimented, and she smiled back at him. Then she looked at him and said, "You know, if I had met you on the road, judging by your attire, I wouldn't have known today was your wedding." Jide laughed. "I am a very simple man. Why do I have to spend all that money on an occasion when I can simply wear one of my old clothes?" he responded. "You mean to tell me that you did not get a new clothes for the wedding?" she asked in shock. He nodded proudly and said, "I have had this attire on me for 3 years, and it has served me well. I believe money should be kept for important purposes. Did you see the amount of food items my father brought to pay your dowry? I told him we cannot be wasting money like that, and when he insisted, I refused to go with him. He also offered to get me a new traditional attire for today, but I stood my ground as always and put on the attire I have on now. I cannot be part of such wasteful lifestyle." Bola's heart began to beat in fear. What have I gotten myself into? Kunle told her auntie that Jide was on a trip, which was why he was not present at the dowry payments. But she decided to keep to herself and not say anything further. Then she spoke up. "I am hungry. Can I please get some corn and pear to eat?" she asked. "No, Pear is almost out of season, so anyone you find now will be overpriced. I will tell the maids to prepare yam for you, Jide said as he got up and walked away. Bola began to panic, wondering how she was going to adjust to her new home. All her life, she ate whatever she wanted, dressed beautifully, and waited for a wealthy man to marry her. But now, she did not need a prophet to tell her that although she was surrounded by riches and wealth, she did not have access to it because her husband was very stingy. Days passed and each day revealed new sides of Jide. Bola soon discovered that her husband owned only 8 pieces of clothing, which he wore in a strict rotation. Their quarters were plain because Jide believed that decorations were a waste of money. She had left most of her clothing in her auntie's house, hoping that her husband would buy her luxurious new outfits. Jide's stingy nature quickly began to place a huge strain on their marriage. I do not understand why you need all these things, Jide would complain even when she asked for the most basic things. We need to save money, he often said. What are you even saving money for, Jide? Look around. We have enough money. Let's enjoy ourselves a little bit, Bola would say. Speak for yourself, oh. I am enjoying my life just fine. That is the response she often gets from Jide. Bola became frustrated and alone. Her days were filled with constant back and forth between herself and her husband, and she had no one to confide in. Her father-in-law Kunle had left on a long trip soon after her wedding, as if he had known what was coming and wanted to avoid it. Desperate for companionship, Bola began to seek solace in Ruth, an older maid who worked in Kunle's household. Through her conversations with Ruth, Bola learned more about Jide's past. Kunle only met his son 2 years ago. Ruth revealed that Master Kunle and Jide's mother were young lovers. When she got pregnant, she ran away because Kunle's parents threatened her, and she was the daughter of a poor farmer. No one knew why Jide was the way he was, but Kunle let him be because he was overjoyed to have a child his wife never had before she passed away. While they were talking, Ruth advised Bola to learn bead making as she offered to take them to the market to sell for her. At least you can use the money to buy some things for yourself, said Ruth. Bola took Ruth's advice to heart and began learning bead making urgently as she needed to earn money for herself. Meanwhile, back in her village,
if you made it this far, it means you're enjoying the story. Please kindly like and drop your comments down below. And also subscribe to this channel and make sure to turn on your notification bell to be the first to know when we drop our next story. Alright, let's get back to our story.
Auntie Kudi was growing increasingly restless. It had been 3 months since the wedding, and she had expected to be swimming in wealth by now. The people she had borrowed money from were starting to demand for their money. In her desperation, she sent a message to Bola asking why she had left her to suffer. Auntie Kudi was confident that the messenger would return with bags of money. So she invited her creditors to gather at her house on the same evening the messenger would return. But she was in for a shock. Instead of bringing back wealth, the messenger returned with sad news from Bola. She narrated to him how pitiful her life was as a married woman. To make matters worse, she even asked her auntie for a loan if she had any money to spare. Auntie Kudi nearly fainted when she heard the news. In a panic, she tried to flee, but someone noticed her and alerted the others, who quickly caught up with her. She pleaded desperately, "Please, have mercy on me. I am an old woman," she cried. "Were you old when you borrowed money from us? Eh?" One of them fired back at her, but she continued to beg for more time, and eventually they agreed to give her more time. Immediately, she turned to her other nephews to help, sharing with them what Bola was going through. Femi, who was the eldest of them, spoke up angrily. "Auntie, I knew something was wrong, but you were only interested in money. Well, we cannot keep paying for your mistakes. We will give you what we can, and then we will send some money to Bola. We have our own families now. If we pay up such huge debts, our own families would definitely suffer," Femi said, speaking on behalf of his brother. Realizing she had no other choice, Auntie Kudi sold her only plot of land to pay off her debts. She also knew she had to find a way to support herself, so she decided to sell fruits in the markets. However, when she went to sell, the villagers began to mock her. "How can Kule's in-law be selling fruits in the markets?" they asked. Some of the men she had once looked down on would deliberately buy from her, only to laugh in her face. Auntie Kudi felt humiliated, but she knew this was her fate now. She would live on the profits from her fruit business and whatever income her nephews sent to her. As time passed, Bola mastered the art of bead making and was finally ready to sell her creations. But before doing so, she decided to do something unexpected. She gifted the first piece to her husband. "I thought this would look good with that white attire you always wear on Sundays," she said. Jide carefully examined the beads, his eyes narrowing as he looked at them. "This is well crafted," he said slowly, holding the bead up to the lights. "But why would you spend your time on something like this? Bead making won't bring us wealth." Bola, who was already prepared for his usual response, said gently, "It is not just about wealth, my husband. I made this for you because I care for you. I know you don't like to spend money on things that are not necessary, but this is a small gift from me to show my appreciation to you." Jide was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by her sincerity. Finally, he nodded, and to her surprise, he put the bead around his neck. "Thank you," he said quietly. Bola smiled, feeling a small victory in her heart. She knew this was just a tiny step, but it was a step nonetheless. Days turned into weeks, and Bola continued to make and sell beads, slowly accumulating enough money to buy small things that brought her joy, like a piece of cloth, and occasionally she would give her husband one item or the other. She noticed that he had begun to open up to her gradually. For example, when he returned from work, he would tell her about his day, and he would often ask her to visit him at work so they could spend more time together. One day, while they sat under the tree eating a meal, Bola asked him a question at the risk of spoiling his mood. "My husband, why are you so focused on saving money? It is good to save money, but yours seems like an obsession." Jide looked uncomfortable that he wanted to run away from the conversation, but he also felt like she was his safe space, and he finally sighed. He said, "It is my mother. When I was a child, she always struggled to make ends meet. We barely had enough to eat, and she constantly worried about money. It was a hard life, and she would often tell me, 'Jide, never waste money. Save every coin you earn, because you never know when you might need it.' And when she was very ill, we did not have enough money to treat her. She died because the money was not enough for her medical attention." Bola felt pity in her heart and hugged him, allowing Jide to lean on her. "I am sorry you had to go through that," she said. "I know it makes you very uncomfortable to talk about this, but my dear, we are living miserably. And what if money cannot save your loved ones at the end of the day? What happens to all the money you saved?" She responded to him. Jide thought deeply. He had never imagined a scenario like that. So after a long period of silence, he said, "You are right. I guess I just felt stuck after I lost my mother. I promise you, my love, I will do better." Bola smiled. "We will take it one step at a time. We will save for the future, but we will also make sure we enjoy the present. Life is meant to be lived." Bola and Jide worked together to reshape their lives. Bola continued to expand her bead-making business, bringing in a steady income that allowed her to buy small luxuries for their home. She was careful to make sure that every purchase was discussed with Jide, easing him into the idea that it was okay to spend money on things that brought comfort and joy. Jide, on the other hand, loosened up as promised. After all, he was never really stingy. He was only scared for the future. He began to take better care of himself. He bought his wife what she needed and provided for his home in every way a man is required to. Their love blossomed, their relationship deepened, and they lived happily ever after. The moral of the story is that it is unwise for anyone to build their financial fantasies on someone else's income. Thank you for watching today's story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Also, share your thoughts in the comment section down below. Until next time, keep the imaginations alive. Bye.